Our next speaker, Gary Hirshberg, Inventing the Future of Food. Gary is the chairman and co-founder of Stonyfield Farm, the world's leading organic yogurt producer, and the author of Stirring It Up and How to Make Money and Save the World. Previously, he directed the Rural Education Center, the small organic farming school from which Stonyfield was spawned. Before that, Gary had served as executive director for the New Alchemy Institute, a research and education center dedicated to organic farming, aquaculture, and renewable energy. He has also authored books on wind power and organic gardening. Gary is a speaker on sustainability, climate change, the profitability of green and socially responsible business, organic agriculture, and sustainable economic development. Help me welcome Gary Hirshberg.
Well, you all have had a long and full 2 days, and I'm sort of humbled to be standing between you and drinks and relaxing, so I'm going to get right to the point. First, Martha, I have to say thank you. Mark and Winnie and I go way back. I'm from that generation. When we started Stonyfield back in the early 80s, 1983, starting an organic yogurt company was a little out there. It was nobody was eating yogurt. No one knew what organic was. I often say we had a wonderful company. We just had no supply and no demand. And Mark and I were pretty lonely in those days. So, but I also want to say to the president, Stonyfield was the founding funder of Wholesome Wave. So we're obviously very excited. And I should also mention to all of you, Martha may or may not be aware, there's a film that we've underwritten, a series, we hope, on PBS, premiering on April 5th. And it's called Food Forward. You can go to foodforward.tv or .com. I think it's .tv. And the very first film is on urban farming. It's a phenomenal job that they've done, and I urge you to take a look at it. You'll be happy to know that I don't have too much sort of bad news tonight to share about after you've spent 2 days poring over the tragedy of our current food system. But I do have a little bit that I have to share with you. I'm mostly here to talk about sunny stuff. But let me start by saying just a couple of contextual points. The President's Cancer Panel, which I think many of you are probably well aware of, formed by Ronald Reagan, a senior oncologic panel reports into the President every July, reported when President Obama took office, the then Bush-appointed panel, just to be clear, there wasn't a partisan aspect to this, reported that 41% of us, 41% of Americans are going to be diagnosed with cancers. This is in 2010. When the panel was first convened, it was around 21%. So this, you all know very well, I'm preaching to the choir, but this is a trend line. Not very much reported, didn't get a lot of attention. The primary causality, as defined by these oncologists, let's forget, these are not agronomists, was an unattended exposure to chemicals in our air, water, soil, but primarily in our food. And of course, since then, I don't think a day or a week has gone by where you haven't seen some new study correlating health effects. It's the ADHD analysis. I'm on the board of a children's camp, and the nurses there who've been there for 30 years tell me that the lineup after they drop off the kids, to drop off the drugs for the kids is something they've never seen before. And we have this, most of us, at least my age, didn't know anyone diagnosed with ADHD, but there's a clear correlation now, and it's actually been published in pediatrics that exposure to pesticides pre-5 years old is a high correlation to ADHD, brain development, IQ now, and so forth. So, you all know this stuff cold, but I find it helpful to set a context for my supermarket buyers, for my customers, for the 95% of consumers who are not yet eating organic, but I'll stress the word yet here, to set this kind of context. And if you had a non-organic banana this morning, which probably no one here did, but just close your eyes for a second, because this is what I try to establish as a sort of a basal context. And you all know, again, like most, unlike most folks, that this is not in the peels. You don't wash this stuff out. This is in solution. It's osmotically made its way into the cells. You can titrate and find presence of these compounds, not necessarily at carcinogenic levels, but you can find them throughout the tissue of the any fruits out there and vegetables. And when we look at the patterns, it's always been difficult for us in this space to talk about causality, to talk about correlations, though I will say that we're finally starting to get some very solid data now, like the ADHD studies, like the President's Cancer Panel data that I showed you. But one thing we can say for sure is, while we can't necessarily directly correlate pesticide exposures with this kind of trend or increasing childhood cancers, the one thing we can absolutely say, and no one really disputes, is that these patterns follow, there's a Western behavior pattern that is tightly correlated. You can look around the world. You can look at recent studies that I've been seeing where looking at, for example, Asian women who, in the same families, family members who grow up in their indigenous countries and grow up here, and you'll see gigantically disproportionate levels of everything from breast to pancreatic cancer. And of course, it's growing in these other regions as our sort of charismatic Western ways make their way. As we know, a great problem that we face now is the rest of the world wants to eat like us, God forbid. And of course, this goes beyond pesticides, and I don't mean to be horribly depressing at this late hour, but if you've seen Food Inc., you know that most of our meat and much of our dairy comes from this kind of operation. And while I could spend a lot of time talking about this, the real point I want to make is, aside from the fact that there's exactly nothing natural going on here, these animals are truly in manure up to their knees, eating only corn. What I want to draw to your attention is that there's no omega-3s, or at least they're gone by the time the animals are anywhere close to maturity or harvest. Turns out, if you have not seen it yet, I urge you to get a book called Anti-Cancer, A New Way of Life by the late Dr. David Servan Schreiber, who was a research neurologist and a research MD and a PhD. David is an old family friend of ours who passed away. David makes the contention that, and now at significant cancer research institutes and even at the NCI, you're starting to see buy-in to this notion that many of us have cancer cells in our bodies, but not all of us get cancers. And the belief system that we're starting to develop is that, essentially as adults, we only have two kinds of cells that grow. We have fat cells and cancer cells. And cancer is being seen increasingly in oncologic circles as an inflammatory disease. In other words, those who develop cancer develop it because we create the inflammatory environment for that for growth. And it's omega-3s are increasingly being understood now as an anti-inflammatory. You know that we're supposed to have a healthy balance of 6s to 3s, and if you're not taking your fish oil, please get on it, because it's really one of the only ways you can restore a healthy balance. The point is that you can look at the beef, butter, pork, and eggs today that look a lot like the stuff that we ate growing up. They're not the same. They're molecularly, nutritionally, and on every other level, they are completely different. The omega-6 to 3 ratios, which we're supposed to be at somewhere around 3 to 1 biologically, these foods are, well, you can see here, they're in the ranges of 15 to 20 to 1. By the way, if you eat 3 times at a fast food restaurant in 1 week, you can go to 30 to 1 in your own body. So the point of my mentioning this is that there's a bunch of conditions going on, but the one obviously that I think we can certainly draw some inferences about is pesticides. Now I need to just make one last sort of depressing report, and then I'll swing around to something more hopeful. As many of you probably know, I've been active in the formation of something called the Just Label It campaign. I've really been I retired actually as CEO at Stonyfield a couple of months ago after 29 years. Now I'm the chairman, and I'm working about 100% time on this campaign. And I want to make sure you're aware of what's going on. You can see here, of course, the U.S. is certainly the apex and the epicenter of GMO production, and that's because the 5 or 6 major chemical companies, and let's just call them chemical companies, let's be clear about this, the so-called biotech companies are here. What you are probably aware of is that the principal gene that's been engineered into our crops since 1996, when these crops were first approved, has been herbicide tolerance. Of course, insecticide tolerance is the second. I'm just going to speak to you for just a moment here quickly about herbicides. And what we have to understand is that the chemical companies do not dispute what I'm about to share with you. I've been in debates now endlessly with these folks. The net result since 1996 of the introduction of these crops has been an absolute explosion in the use of herbicides, notably glyphosate, because it's mostly Roundup ready or Roundup tolerant crops that have been out there. So this is the kind of trend lines that you see directly correlated to the introduction. We've seen essentially a 600 to 1,000% increase in glyphosate use in this country. All kinds of issues with that. You've talked a lot about biodiversity. This study just came out this week. You can talk to Bill Fries and the folks at CFS about it, but I mean, this is certainly the canary in the coal mine. Our monarch populations are now in a situation of severe decline, mainly because the milkweed that they depend on is being killed by wind drift of glyphosate, because we're now not only using more glyphosate, but we're using it through more of the year. We're using it during warmer weather, so you're getting more evaporation and therefore more airborne transit of these compounds. But that, as if that's not bad enough, you're now saying, why do they invite such a depressing guy to come tonight? If that's not bad enough, this is actually, I think, the whopper. We have now created 26 weeds out there that are herbicide tolerant. They are no longer affected by what used to be a relatively effective and relatively benign control agent. But because we're using so much of it, the weeds, as I like to explain to kids, don't wait around to do focus groups to figure out what to do. They just evolve naturally to becoming herbicide tolerant. There are now mare's tails and pigweeds and amaranth that get to be the diameter of my wrist, grow to 10 feet tall. I was with a farmer recently who said that these weeds are so strong they stop a combine in its tracks. And the net result is that these weeds have now spread to over 13 million acres. This is an outdated slide. 26 states, probably more, but that's what we know from 2010. And the net result is that the biotech folks have been suggesting that if you have a weed problem, you've got only really two choices. You can bring in labor or mechanical cropping, which no farmer can afford the extra costs to control something like this. Or you can just add what they call bring in the cavalry. Well, the cavalry to them is 2,4-D. And farmers have been told to put mix in blends of 2,4-D with their glyphosate to get impacts. And as you're probably very well aware, on December 21st, Dow AgroSciences introduced the first 2,4-D resistant corn. This is a nightmare. This is a nuclear escalation. And we are seeing, there's all kinds of data. 2,4-D is a game changer. And I think there's plenty of folks, Jay and others in this room, who've got a whole lot more science under their belts than I. But what I understand about 2,4-D, and this is not the Agent Orange 2,4-D, there's no dioxins now. But this is there are a whole enormous host of human and plant problems with this. This is the number one disruptor in terms of wind drift of any herbicides that we use. And the projections now from Penn State and Washington State University and others who've been forecasting the net result of this, if this crop gets approved, and of course the family of 2,4-D resistant crops that will follow, is that we're going to see the same pattern we saw with glyphosate, a 600 to 1,000%, 6 to 10-fold increase in glyphosate use, again, at different times of year, and so, of 2,4-D use. So I mention all of this by way of saying that, while the GMO problem may seem to be slightly askew from some of your focuses, we all need to be focused on GMOs right now. And labeling, I believe, is the only actual answer to leveling the playing field. We don't have the dollars that these companies have. We certainly don't, thanks to Citizens United, we don't have the, we're not having elections anymore, right? We're having sales. And we don't have the dollars to fight this kind of campaign finance reform and lobbying stuff. The Union of Concerned Scientists came out with an absolutely stunning report based on about 20 years of research, 13 years of commercialization of GE crops, showing really that all the promises of GMOs have not been met. Drought resistance, plant hardiness, and so forth. But instead we have this legacy. The failure to yield report is something you can download, you can get off the web. I'd urge you to do so. Because it isn't quite lay-friendly, a couple of my colleagues and I wrote a book, an e-book that you can also download called Label It Now, which is a short read, which really summarizes everything I've just shared with you and the mandate for labeling. You can get this at any of these folks. But the bottom line is I do have some good news, and that is, bless you, that this Thursday we launched the, when CFS filed the petition to get the FDA to label in the middle of September, we launched this Just Label It campaign. We announced on Tuesday 1.1 million people have signed this petition, more than twice the number in the history of any comment on food at the FDA. That's worth clapping for, I agree. And if you have not signed it, please go to justlabelit.org. It literally takes you 30 seconds. More importantly, please send it to your list. I believe we can have 2 million people by the election, and trust me, there's an enormous, way beyond the focus on the FDA, there's an enormous political strategy that we're unloading here, and I'll be happy to say more about this. Anyhow, getting back to my point, we did have a kind of a watershed in 1945. As I say, you all know the history with pesticides, but let's face it, the cancer correlations we've seen are tied to other lifestyle changes. We saw an explosion in the use of sugar, tied to soda pops mostly. We sedentary lifestyles. We're all sitting in front of screens and been doing a whole lot of that since the mid-1940s. This is an actual ad. You've probably seen it from Life magazine back in the 60s. So we know that chemical exposures is a major causality. And as I mentioned, the omega-6, omega-3 ratios. What we can't, of course, say is what's the synergistic effects of all of these and what are the direct correlations. But this was what we were all thinking about back in the 70s at New Alchemy and back in 1983 with our incredibly smart cows in Wilton, asking thought questions like this. This is the farm, the Rural Education Center that became Stonyfield Farm. This has been the run that we've been on since that time, as was mentioned in Lorna's kind introduction. Smart folks will observe that I said we started in 1983. You'll note I skipped the first 7 years on this slide. It's what we refer to as the bad old days. Took us a while to figure it out. Hey, I'm a child of the 60s, right? I mean, we were paying farmers, ridiculous amounts to convert, and we just couldn't make money, and therefore we couldn't grow sales. But the real point that I want to make here, and really to share with you sort of a 30-year view of my business, but also a 40-some-odd-year view of my life's work, is this point, is that we have to understand that what you all are working on here is not just how we behave, it's actually how we think. We're talking about a deep flaw in humanity's relationship to the planet that's a direct result of a way of thinking that's evolved, and we could go back to Copernican thought and so forth. I won't take you all the way back there at this hour, but instead I will give you an illustration of what I'm talking about. This is produced for the World Wildlife Federation, and it's the best example I can come up with of how to think differently. If I asked you how much water was in this cup of latte, you might have had, this is peppermint tea. And by the way, thank you for the peppermint tea. This is first conference I've spoken at where something wonderful like this is supplied, so thank you. I've been on the sort of coffee circuit. But if I asked you anyways how much water this is, you might say 12, 14, 16 ounces, and you'd be partly right. The reality is that it's about 208 quarts of water that goes into making a single cup of coffee. The water footprint of a cup of coffee, if you look at the water needed to grow the coffee, if you look at the water needed to grow the grain to feed the cows, the water needed to wash the dairy, the water needed to feed the cows, the water needed to grow the sugar, and then all the industrial uses of water that you see on the left. This is what we all know to be true. We know this to be true of our carbon footprints, our water footprints, and our toxic footprints. They are much, much larger than we measure. And unfortunately, in our very limited, we have this extremely narrow view of economics that if it's not on the income statement or the balance sheet, it actually doesn't exist. And all of these footprints, whatever they are, these ecological footprints, are direct results of our choices, but no one's measuring them, and therefore no one's accountable. And I've sort of summarized these in my book as being what I call the modern-day myths. One, no one will ever say these words because it sounds so stupid, but this is actually how we behave, that the earth is a subsidiary of our economies. You all know, I mean, the exact reciprocal is true. All economies have been made possible by a bountiful earth. But we actually have this idea that it's there for the dumping, it's there for the taking. The commons are seen as something subsidiary to us, and that we have an innate right to take advantage of. We, of course, have the myth that the earth is infinitely resilient and productive to meet whatever we need. We all know that's not true. I mean, we have basic myths like the notion of waste, which is a uniquely human myth. No other species produces toxic waste that adversely affect other populations. The waste of one system is always the food for another. And then we have the myth of that place called away, where we send our waste. I have yet to figure out where that is. But the deepest and most pernicious myth to me is this one. I just alluded to it. Externalities are the direct consequences of our economic behaviors. So a national obesity epidemic, the fact that 1 million family farmers have gone under in my lifetime, the national diabetes epidemic, the national cancer rates of cancer. These are direct results of economic choices that we humans make. But they don't appear anywhere on our P&Ls or our income statement or our balance sheets. And so in economic terms, they literally don't exist. They absolutely don't. And this is how deep the thinking runs here. And this is what we're about. We have to actually incorporate it in a systemic way of thinking. And so, a lot of companies have now gotten on board with notions of sustainability. The more I attend conferences and hear these huge megacorps talking about sustainability, I'm reminded of Lily Tomlin, my favorite philosopher. She says, no matter how cynical I get, it's hard to keep up. But most companies, she also says, and you'll love this, she also says, we're all in it alone. I love that line. Most companies are fixated in sort of this. If you look at a transact on the way towards sustainability, most folks are businesses that are thinking about this stuff are focused on steps 2 and 3. Obviously, step 1 is get in compliance so you're not fined or sued or illegal. But this is where most of us are focused. But yet, this deep way of thinking requires that we actually get to step 4. This is new terms. I always say, Stonyfield's very proud of the fact that the vast majority of our containers, of our waste from our facility is recycled. There's 1,000 ways that we can collect and put our cups to use. And now we're using polylactic acid, plant-based packaging. It's corn-based, but we're doing GMO offsets. But we're moving down the trajectory. And by the way, the plant-based packaging is 49% lower carbon footprint than fuel. So while it is corn, it's at least a step in the right direction. But really, none of that's success. Success will be when you finish eating the yogurt, you'll eat the cup. And if you think that's funny, think about an ice cream cone. I mean, this is within our means, and that's what I mean by a different way of thinking. And so as we move towards sort of stage 4, step 4 thinking in our food systems and our engineering systems, and we start to recognize there can't be waste, and there is no such place as away, and we're a subsidiary of the earth, and we integrate this thinking, guess where we wind up? We wind up having to talk about organic. Because indeed, that's exactly what organic is about. Organics is stage 4 thinking. It's the notion that we're going to actually have to take carbon out of the atmosphere now if there's any hope for future generations. We're not going to slow down our way out of this global warming crisis. And in so doing, of course, we're not only going to sequester carbon, we're going to build topsoils, and we're going to build tilth, and we're going to build fertility for future generations. Now, just a couple of words about organic. One thing to understand, if you forget all the science and all the morals and all the ecologic stuff that I'm going to share with you in just a second, understand that economically it's a very, very good and successful segment. The top chart shows you the rate of organic sales growth versus the lower line, which is conventional food growth over the last decade or so. And you'll note, even in the recession, even in this dark, period in American and global history, economic history, organic still outpaced conventional. And I'll tell you a very fascinating thing. For most of my career, The number one reason that people chose organic food was having children. But actually, fascinatingly enough, the last year and a half, and tragically enough, the number one reason now that rivals having children is having a health event in your family or in your life. You know, everybody in this audience knows somebody dealing with cancer now. That was not the case when Stonyfield started in the early 80s. The lower chart here, by the way, shows organic dairy, where actually we did, in fact, have a dip below conventional dairy growth during the recession, but we bounced back up, and now, in fact, it looks like 2012 is going to be back up into about 16, 18% annual growth. So we're creating jobs, we're adding to balance of trade, we are a significant growth industry. As I mentioned before, you know, it's a $30 billion industry, but it's about 5% of U.S. food, but growing much, much faster. And of course, there's a lot of reasons for only being 5%, but on the other hand, since I come from the world where you couldn't even use the word organic and industry in the same sentence, to me it's all quite good. I mean, you know, many of us were started out this way back with our teepees and our wet goats, you know, back in the 70s. I mean, for me, organic, you know, I know that for the average consumer, it used to mean that you have to chew extra. Okay, and some of you know what I'm talking about with the sort of dark, dirty natural food stores and the moths flying around and, you know, all of that. And we would argue, no, the bread is meant to be extra chewable, you know. But really, truly, we now, organic has evolved to being consummate with gourmet, and you see the finest restaurants everywhere. You know, our friend Michelle Nishan, who helped to start Wholesome Wave, and other world-class chefs, you know, are proud to put and portray organic on the menu. So you can understand what does organic mean in more statistical terms. This is our purchases from 2011, just to give you an idea of the footprint that results from our buying these commodities. And of course, obviously, milk is the biggest of them. But this is not, you know, philosophy. This is actually what's happening. We're truly avoiding the production and use of all of these compounds. Interestingly, from an economics point of view, the top line here shows the milk price that Organic Valley and Stonyfield, that's Organic Valley Co-op is our milk supplier, that we pay our farmers, their farmers. The bottom line here is the price that you get if you're a conventional milk farmer, in other words, dairy farmer. In other words, it's a roller coaster ride that in most years your price is below what it actually costs you to produce. Conventional farming, dairy farming, unfortunately in this country, and you know, just understand my scale, we're 1,800 family farmers, the average herd size is 82 cows, okay? So there's no way that these folks can make money at 12, 13 bucks a hundredweight per 100 pounds. So we've been able, our farmers, every last one of them is profitable. Every last one of them tells me that they wouldn't be farming if it wasn't for organic, that they are making money. They were not making money when they were conventional. And I recognize it's a late hour, but I thought if you'd indulge me, rather than hearing from me, I'd share a brief film, if you can help me, John, so you can hear from one of our farmers about his story here. So let me just turn to that for a minute.
I'm George Teague. I live here in Elon, North Carolina. I'm actually the 5th generation on the farm here. Come on, girls, let's go. We have an organic dairy farm. My wife, Cherry, helps here on the farm. My son, Taylor, and nephew, Ben. My mother and father are still living here on the farm. My dad's an integral part of everything that we do here. Come on!
I started out 60 years ago in September. I had my first milk check from 10 cows. At the time, at 100 dairies, 50 pounds, and now we got 6.
We were trying to make a living here on the farm, and it just became more and more of a struggle, and we were going more and more in debt just to stay in business. Good morning, girls.
We didn't know from month to month if we were going to be able to pay the bills with our milk check or not, because the price for conventional milk is just up and down constantly.
We pretty much decided, well, let's start trying to figure out an exit strategy.
Me and my daughter both, you know, probably 5 years before we went organic, we were trying to plant that seed in his head. My number one concern was for the health of our family. I felt like that was the most important thing to me.
Just about year-round, we were spraying things. You know, when you spray all day long and then you're up half the night coughing, you know your body's telling something's not right. Every time when we finished planting corn, I'd think, well, how many years have I taken off my life this time? Used to spray with a 1,000-gallon spray truck, and I had gramoxone in it along with atrazine. Well, I don't remember if a valve was leaking just a little bit or something, but I was trying to tighten it up. Instead of fixing it, the whole thing broke off, and there was no way to stop it except for just put my hand over the valve. That was about 30 minutes. I was standing there drenched with gramoxone just sort of soaking into me.
I had to call poison control, and he was, you know, really sick. He got physically sick. He was, you know, still sick the next day. It was kind of a wake-up call for us. We didn't want anything like that to happen again.
Between health issues and to try to just keep the farm in business, I said, we're going to become organic or either we're going to quit. That's the two choices.
I guess every dairy farmer in North Carolina knew in a short period of time that we had gone organic, because we were the first ones in the state that did.
I'm not going to say it's easy because it's not, but organically, the cows are doing what they're meant to do, and we're doing what we were meant to do.
Our vet bills are probably 10% of what they were before. They don't have as many stomach problems. We don't have operations that we have to do anymore. My joke's always we spend more money on cats and dogs than what we do on cows for the vet bills.
My son had always had a lot of allergy problems and had asthma and carried around prescription medications, and as we started making changes in our life and our diet, then he started throwing away those medications, and it just made a really big impact on our health and our life.
It was an economical decision to try to just keep the farm in business. But once we got into it and doing it, the more I realized that that has nothing to do with it. It's because it's the right thing to do. Chemical companies want you to think that when you spray it on the field and a month later it's going to magically disappear. Well, it's going to disappear, but it's going to be going in our water supply and go down a river, and then it's out to sea, I guess, but it's still around. It's not just disappearing.
We would never, ever be able to go back conventional. Too many good things have happened to us health-wise. Our cows are healthier.
I like feeling better and being healthy, and I like seeing the animals healthy.
We could never go back conventional, ever.
So that's, I could, I could honestly interview all 1,800 farms, and you hear the same stories. The stories break your heart. The farmers talk about how when they used to be farming conventionally, the kids would come running up to them after school, and say, whoa, 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 and they'd go out to a shed and take their coveralls off and, have to shower before they could hug their kids. Now the kids can, ride with them. I don't know if you're aware, organic cows live 2 to 3 times longer than conventional cows. The vets, we have Munch and Learns. We have these lunchtime seminars where we bring vets in to educate our employees. The vets describe themselves as the Maytag salesman, the repairmen. I mean, they don't ever go. They don't go to these farms. The animals are that healthy, and so and understand again what I said before. It's just great economics. This is a University of Vermont study, a UVM study showing, and you can see obviously it starts with the higher price, but let's understand, this goes all the way back to those myths. We don't pay in this country family farmers the right price to start with. We have this sense of entitlement to cheap food. We pay the lowest percentage of our income on food of any nation on earth. And you're hearing all the belly aching about gasoline prices now. I mean, go to any other country, folks. I mean, we're not, again, the subsidy system has been a challenge here. But what we have found, we set out here with this sort of moral and scientific objectives. We found the economics are just staggering. To go even further into this, we've discovered that we've launched something called the Greener Cow Project. By moving the animals off of corn completely, moving over to flax and high omega-3 fatty acid feed, we've been able to reduce their burping emissions, which is that's Stonyfield's biggest footprint, is our cow burps. It's methane, which is 22 times more impactful than CO2. We've improved the omega-3s in the cow's milk by 30%. I mean, these are herbivores. They're not carnivores, right? I mean, we've been thinking, we can certainly jack the productivity out of them, but the cows love it, and of course the farmers love it too. You're talking about their primary asset, not to mention these creatures who live there, with them. And so when I showed you the omega-3 story with the feedlot before, I read a lot of dairy magazines on the plains. I'm sure you all do too. But I saw this Pfizer ad in one, and I tore it out recently and went back to the office and did a little bit of photoshopping. They're saying, gee, what if we could get rid of O157H7 E. coli, which is it's a feedlot-created organism. They're saying, what if we could get rid of it at the source, of course, with their drugs, right? So I just did a little bit of shopping, and I can tell you there is no O157H7 anywhere in our organic herds, period, because the animals are getting what they're supposed to be eating, just what the folks just said. So I want to just illustrate what's going on, because I could talk about milk all day long, but this is an absolutely spectacular example of what we're talking about. What you're looking at right here is about 45,000 acres of organic sugarcane. And you may or may not know that the traditional way of growing sugar is that when you before harvest, you go in and you burn the fields. Obviously, there's a lot of photosynthesis going on. You need a lot of leafy matter relative to the amount of stock, the actual economic crop. And so in our, again, simplistic ways of thinking, we burn the fields, which of course is a huge carbon release. I have flown over the Florida Panhandle and seen this with my own eyes. But also it's sort of, again, doubly unproductive, because any organic matter that has been built up during in the season in the soil is also volatilized. It's also released to the atmosphere, which means next year you've got to replace that fertility with something synthesized, usually from Venezuela, some kind of natural gas. So our partners in Brazil decided in 1997 that they were just part of this sort of inflationary treadmill, burn, need more inputs, burn, pay more for inputs, and so on. And so they converted, and now, as I say, it's over 45,000 acres. And what they've actually done is, I won't take the time now to go into all this, you can read the bullets, but they've done, engaged a full constellation of organic practices. Understand that the essence of organics is building soils. And so everything is focused on recognizing, we've lost 50% of the topsoils that were here when Lewis and Clark made their way across the U.S. And so here's just an illustration of what is going on here. They're shredding the sugar cane. The dump truck there is actually collecting the cane, but the leafy matter, the duff, is being shred and spread. You can see me grabbing a clump of it. It's about 1 meter deep. In nature, it takes 100 years to build an inch of topsoil. They're building inches per decade here. And of course, the biodiversity results have been nothing short of staggering. So here's some of the statistics. They've had a 90% reduction in pest damage since they were non-organic. The biodiversity story is stunning. 312 species are back there now. They're cougars bigger than me wandering through these fields. The entire food chain is healthy. They've improved the groundwater, not only quality, but also the supply. The groundwater is now up closer to the surface. Part of it is they're much more drought resilient because by putting all this carbon matter into the soil, it doesn't get evaporated quite as quickly. They've had drought years here the last few years where the conventional sugar farmers are losing crop. It's not making it to market because of drought conditions, and these guys are getting the stuff out to market. The carbon content is now just about equal to native forests. They're telling me that within 2 years it will surpass the native forests that were there when they started. But again, note the economic statistics. 10% improvement in yields over when they were non-organic. And as a result, the organic sugar that used to cost me 100% more than conventional right now costs exactly the same. In fact, were it not for ethanol, it would cost less, but ethanol competition's keeping the global price up very high. These practices that you're seeing here, I could take you, as a yogurt company, you know, I buy like 150 different commodities. I buy fruits and flavorings and sweeteners and so forth. So, you know, our banana operation here, this is an effort that was started actually when I was back at New Alchemy in my nonprofit days, but it's a local cooperative that has gone completely organic now. We've been able, obviously, to fund them. And again, making extraordinary, gorgeous, fully biodiverse, ecological ag ecosystems, and you know, using all these practices. And again, I could take you through commodity after commodity. It's too late at this time for me to do that. But what I want to underscore to you is there's really, you know, a lot of people say to me, organic's a nice idea, but it's not really proven. And my view, it's actually the chemicals that are not proven. You know, we've been on a 60, 70-year experiment with our bodies and the planet, and I don't need to tell this audience, you know, that the data is in. The reality is that I call organics win-win-win-win-win economics. The animals win. From a biodiversity point of view, multiple species win. The farmers win. They make more money. Obviously, the consumers win. You know, if obesity is a $200 billion problem in our country, 41% of Americans getting cancer is in the trillions, okay, just to put a dollar to it. So this is national health insurance. It's national security. We're reducing inputs and dependence on fossil fuels coming in. We're building topsoil. I meant to mention it earlier. You could see there's no erosion in that sugarcane field. I mean, there's no, the wind, the topsoil isn't exposed to air, to wind or rain for even 1 second. By the way, the dump truck that was driving around there, it has low PSI tires, so as not to compact the soil. So you can actually drive over your foot with that dump truck and it won't hurt you. I didn't try it, but that's what they told me. But in any case, I want you to understand, I could share study after study after study. This one from Washington State University, showing higher antioxidants, longer shelf life, better nutrition in the strawberries, and better yields on the farms. There is no question that we're talking win-win-win economics. This summer, this fall, Iowa State University reported on their studies from 14 years of research that, again, you can see the results, I won't tell you. Similar yields, higher economic returns while improving soil quality. And by the way, when you look at the Rodale research, which takes a 30-year view, side-by-side organic versus conventional trials right next to each other, 100 feet apart, you have actually higher yields for organic. The yields, to be fair, is when you take the needle out, right? The first 3 years, the yields drop, and this is true with most of my farmers. And then in years 4, 5, and 6 in the Rodale studies, the yields got to about parity, and from year 7 on, the yields have been superior, year after year after year, especially in drought conditions, as I mentioned earlier, because again, it's logical, you're retaining that moisture. So, lest you don't want to believe me, there are now the major global food policy organizations around the world, the UN, and so forth, UNEP, UNDP, and others are reporting that there's no way we're going to feed Africa in the 21st century without organic and sustainable methods. Just the basic economics. These farmers cannot afford these higher input production systems. They can't afford the patented seeds that come from GMOs, and they don't get the yields anyways in these conditions. So again, we're finally reaching this point where we're starting to get positive correlation data. And let's not forget this classic study, which was showing that kids on conventional diets, this was also from the University of Washington, switching to organic diets, the organophosphates in their urine dropped by 6-fold within a day of switching over to conventional. And of course, same kids 1 week later switching back. This is not, this is regular food. This is not, these aren't foods selected for toxicity or for organophosphates. This is just switching back, and you can see the data. So let's understand that this is truly win-win economics for our kids. If you're not on the mailing list, I urge you to get on the mailing list of a group called the Organic Center, theorganiccenter.org, where you can download studies like this, which really share in very simple terms the latest studies. They synopsize the reviews on yields, on health, and so forth. Again, the hour is late, and I don't want to belabor this point, but I need to bring up one other dimension of all of this, because in the end, everything that I've learned at Stonyfield, I'm going to summarize right here. We have this crazy idea that if it's going to be food for sale, if it's going to be in a package for consumption, it ought to be food. I know it's a very radical thought. Our founding mission here was to pay farmers properly. And only through organics, in other words, only through a partnership with the consumers who perceive the higher value, are we able to do that. But understand, even when we do that, our gross margins, the margin left after our cost of production is far less than, say, Yoplait and Danone, than my competitors. So, and yet my net margins, my bottom line, is more profitable than theirs as a percentage of sales. So if there's a single lesson that I've learned in 29 years here, this is not just win, 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 win for the farmers, for all of us. This is a winning business model. If you stop and just think about the history of consumer products for a second, think about Coke and Pepsi. It's all about making stuff cheap, right? There's nothing cheaper than sugar, water, corn syrup, solids, and some CO2, right? There's CO2. It's very inexpensive. And what they do is they take these very cheap ingredients, inflate the price, and then get a huge gross margin, which they use then to buy, and the marketers here know this, they make you aware through reach and frequency. That leads to trial, repeat trial, purchase, repeat purchase. And the holy grail at the end of the rainbow is loyalty, right? That's what they want. When you're loyal, then they don't have to spend as much on you. Now, we can't afford to start. Their base model starts with cheap. And I've already shown you, our whole purpose is to pay our farmers 50, 60, 70% more, to hold their price, to not put them on a roller coaster. The net result is that it challenges our business model. But we have leapt all the way to loyalty without going through all those other steps. As you can see here, my spending on advertising is a rounding error next to my competitors. Now, I'm going to close this by summarizing in a very quick anecdote why I know this, what I just told you. I was standing in Florida about 4 years ago. I was holding a competitor's yogurt at a public supermarket. And a little old lady came up to me and tugged me in the elbow, and she said, "Young man, somebody your age really should be eating the Stonyfield instead." This is true. It really happened. It was kind of like a religious experience for me, okay? And I said, well, why? And she said, well, do you know that they give 10% of their profits to environmental causes? They were the first dairy in America to pay farmers not to use synthetic growth hormone. They're completely organic. And I said, whoa, how do you know all this stuff, Mom? No, it wasn't my mom. And she said, well, to be honest, my husband died of colon cancer 6 months ago. We have a granddaughter. She's in high school. We want to see her graduate, I want to see her graduate, go on to college, and maybe get married or have a job or whatever. And the girls and I, she was talking about her bridge club, we're convinced that our late husbands died because of how, we know that we are what we eat. And now we're just reading labels and going to websites and learning. And, here she was not just loyal, but accosting a total stranger in the supermarket. I mean, of course, I hired her on the spot, but that isn't actually true, but I did give her a lot of coupons. But what I'm telling you is this was loyalty personified. This is a passionate consumer who, for a health event, for however she got there, she's not going into the store to buy yogurt. She's going in to buy organic, to buy Stonyfield. And so our lesson over these 29 years has really been that you don't have to build an industry, a future based on cheap. You can pay farmers a proper price. You can take care of the earth. And then you use your packaging. I can't afford advertising, so I use my packaging it's not quite Dr. Bronner's, but you get the idea. There's a lot of messages on there, okay? Or we use our lids, our yogurt tops to talk about stuff that we care about. I have to tell you, when Nancy Pelosi came onto Capitol Hill, she demanded that they get organic yogurt into the cafeteria at Capitol Hill, and it took us about 4 months to get it worked out and negotiated. And unfortunately, the week that our yogurt got to Capitol Hill was the week that I do my annual lid rant about campaign finance reform. and the lid that week, I don't know if I have it up there. It said, it says, in politics, the cream doesn't always rise to the top. I was ranting it. You shouldn't have to be a millionaire to run for Congress, right? So it was very funny because they rejected my yogurt shipment, and I got back the return receipt, and it said, yogurt rejected, too political for Capitol Hill, which I thought was great. But we've had a lot of fun over the years, aside from that skirmish. I mean, this is how you build loyalty. You talk about the stuff you care about. Like Martha, you talk about what you're doing. And when you talk about it, your consumers are engaged. And of course, social media is the gift to all of us who are thinking about whether it's, in our urban farm or at my scale. Stonyfield has 2.4 million people who talk to us in one way or another on a constant basis. This is true loyalty. And we capitalize on this from, putting cows up for adoption. You can send in 5 yogurt tops, and your cow will, you can become the owner of one of our cows. You get a certificate naming you the co-owner. You get a photograph of your cow. In the old days, the cows used to send you 2 letters per year, but now they send out 4 emails a year. We've gone paperless. The cows are tweeting and blogging and whatever else. Go to my website. You'll see our farm cam. Our farmers carry little flip cams around. We put a $150 camera in their hands, and you can go, and I get these letters from guys on Wall Street who tell me, thank you. I just, visited a farm during my lunch break. I'm stressing about the market, and I get to watch a cow chewing her cud. Really exciting. But anyhow, I mean, this is about transparency. We're not. It's about keeping the talk-do ratio low. We talk about what we do. You saw earlier, this is our version of YouTube. We call it YoTube. Lots and lots of videos. You can go on, like the video I just showed you. You can see how our sugar is grown, our bananas are grown, our fruits are grown. Why? Because this transparency is who we are, and B, it's a great story to tell. Our consumers can participate in programs like this where the farmers put a wish out and then the consumers can vote on a flow of money to them. A really fabulous campaign we ran last summer was inviting people to submit their organic moment by a little video. Just send in a video. When did organic occur to you? When did some lunatic come rant at you at Yale some night, some Saturday night? And when did, you change your eating habits? Well, I think we had, do I have the number there? No, I think we had something like 2,700 of these videos that came in. This is a loyal, active populace. So let me bring this to a conclusion and bring this back to earth by saying this, that, I already mentioned organics is 5% of U.S. food. If you broadly include sustainable agriculture, you're talking about 14 or 15%, yet this is the sliver of our pie. And I've made allusion to the political realities here of Citizens United and the fact that we really don't, industries that made their money in the 20th century, who you're focused on here, of course, these chemical companies and so forth, they're not about to, release their fingertip, their grips on our system. And we've got to vote with our feet. We've got it. The other lesson from Stonyfield is when you buy an item at the supermarket and run it past a scanner, you're voting. Now, they know what's going on. The Center for so-called Food Integrity, which was funded by this bunch of folks over here, know their findings. This is their 2011 report. Say consumers don't trust us. Okay, and what do they keep doing? They use more lobbying dollars and more, coercion and so forth. So, I mean, I love this last bullet. This is one of their conclusions. Consumers aren't sure today's agriculture still qualifies as farming, which, sadly is true. So I make mention of this to bring this back to what I told you earlier. This is the infographic from our Just Label It website that went up this week. By the way, we're adding about 100,000 per week. We announced on Tuesday 1 million. We're at 1.1 million tonight. I checked it just before while I was sitting here. And what you need to know is this is not partisan. 91% of consumers want GMOs labeled. 89% of Republicans, 93% of Democrats. I mean, there's essentially margin of error difference. This is rural, urban, rich, poor, north, south, male, female. This is how we're going to change the system. This is about voting with our feet. You all are doing magnificent critical work to document and understand these impacts. But until we translate it into actual political power, we don't have another 30 years to fix the mess that we're in right now. And so, the way I like to describe this is, and please join our website or come on our Facebook and you can track this is really best summarized by Gandhi, who said that anyone who thinks they're too small to make a difference has never been in bed with a mosquito. And, from where I sit, that's what we need to be. I hope you'll take some inspiration from this to know we do have economics on our side, we have ecology on our side, we have health on our side. The history of the American food system is a lot like Winston Churchill's quote. He said, success is the ability to move from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And we don't need to live this way. These are preventable problems. We have the science on our side. We just have to activate the public and understand that when you purchase, you vote. And while that seems small, it seems like a huge thing to do. I promise you, and I'm here as testament to you, it's one consumer, one spoonful at a time. That's how it happens. Margaret Mead was right. That's the way this country was built. And that's the way we can turn this around. So thanks for listening. Thank you.
Gary, one thing for sure, organic farming, we do it because it's the right thing to do.
Right. Indeed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay.
We want to take a few questions.
Okay. You got time? Yes?
Just a couple of questions.
You got one? Oh.
Thank you so much, Dave. That was awesome. Talk. I did a movie called Vanishing Bees. I don't know if you've seen it. Before I want to kind of make a comment and see what you're thinking about. I want to start by saying that I think there's a lot of amazing progress and positive things happening. With that said, if we take a step back and look at what's happening with the food system and take a look at, SOPA, NDAA, the FEMA camps that are being set up. I believe in the work that I'm doing that we are being poisoned.
Yeah.
Just straight out. And so what are your comments in light of tying all the different threads of politics together?
Well, there was no accident that we launched Just Label It during an election year. Because this is the only time, we all know politicians follow, right? They don't lead. Witness what's going on down here. The only time they listen is when you put the dollars aside, and it's the votes that ultimately get them elected. Now, I'm not saying that there's not a lot of purchasing of votes going on. There is, of course. That's what we're witnessing in these primaries. But the next phase of the Just Label It campaign will be asking every incumbent and challenger, are they for or against the consumer's right to know? If you just think about that for 1 second, how can a politician stand up running for election and say, no, I'm not in favor of the consumer's right to know? I mean, essentially, that's what the only way they can say that is if they think that we're stupid, right? And no politician's going to get reelected saying that. So yes, I fully agree with you, but I think look what just happened with pink slime. If you want to be hopeful, I mean, this is an incredible, 3 major plants, you're talking about tens of millions of dollars, were just rerouted in 1 week because a few reporters and a ton of social media and a very active mom in Texas. I really do believe that the average consumer does not trust what's going on in our food, and they're right. We're right, and what we need to do is we need to expedite evolution here by understanding that it's David and Goliath. It's us as individuals versus that 20th century, that money that was made during the period of mythologic history known as the 20th century, where we just thought we could run wild here. And that's why every single day it's incumbent on us, I'm talking about us, to do something political. A letter, an email, a phone call, something, one little thing. This stuff adds up. I am standing here as the product of that because I wasn't able to buy votes for Stonyfield next to Dannon and Yoplait, and yet individuals have done that for me. So my view on this is we have to recognize, a friend of mine says, don't take life too seriously. It's just a temporary condition, okay? We're not around here that long. But during this moment that we're here, we've got knowledge, whether it's activating 3 people, 300 people, 3,000 people. Just, like I said, just label it. This one place where we can put our feet down. And we should take great hope and enthusiasm from what happened with pink slime. That was a stunning success in the direction of rationality. I hope I answered you. Yeah. Yes?
Hi. Your message is very powerful, and I don't mean to put you on the defensive, but I did hear you say, and I was very surprised to hear you talk about GMO offsets when you described PLA packaging.
Yeah.
I'm not as well versed in all of the details of sustainable guidelines as I need to be, and I know it's much discussed within the committee that's preparing the sustainability guidelines, but if there is anybody else who can defend the position I'm taking, which is very much in objection to GMO offsets.
Yeah. Well, I'm not in favor of GMO offsets either, nor am I in favor of carbon offsets. A friend of mine calls offsets morning after pills. That said, it's in the state of technology right this second, it's the best we can do. We faced a choice: use completely oil-based packaging, 100% fossil fuels, or plant-based packaging, in an effort to create more market conditions that will favor more plant-based packaging. The goal here is agricultural waste, switchgrass, non-food crops, and ultimately, actually, you can make polylactic acid, PLA, from even waste treatment plants. You can actually literally take methane out of waste treatment. But we're not there right now. We're trying to expedite evolution. And so I'm a believer in one step at a time, that moving in this direction, and just so you understand what the offset was, we literally went out and found with a third-party agency farmers who are presently using GMOs and paid them not to use GMOs. That's what I mean by an offset. So farmers right now on about something like 1,700 acres last year, it's probably more like 3,400, who would have otherwise been planting GM corn this year are not. That's what we did. And we did it because of the 48% carbon footprint reduction. It's a much lower footprint than taking otherwise oil out of the ground in this one-way thing, which, recycling never recaptures it. And there's an energy footprint to recycling no one thinks about when you shred it, melt it, transport it. So dramatic reduction in footprint, teaching the average consumer that this is possible, showing our competitors that they have to do it. And as we then build, and this is a little bit of the answer to this woman's question, as we then build a critical mass of companies now doing this, that essentially subsidizes the ability to move to the next place on the playing field. So, I don't like driving, that I drove here to talk to you. I have a carbon footprint from tonight. I don't like that there's a carbon footprint to everything, and we all flew here. I don't like these, a lot about modern life. But we have to understand that we got into this mess through a whole series of very small steps. And I think innocent steps. I don't think anyone said, I want to destroy the world, I want to toxify the planet. But we got here through a whole series of missteps, and I think that's how we're going to get our way out. And so for me, it's a very rational, sensible step. It's not something that I advocate, whether with carbon or with GMOs, as a permanent solution, but as a transitional step. It against the alternatives, it made all the sense in the world. You could say, well, why don't you use glass or something else? I could take you through every form of packaging. The package that we're using with PLA is the lightest weight package that's out there, and it's the most benign in terms of toxicity that's out there. If you use glass, it's a carbon nightmare because of the transportation and weight of glass. There's no paper cup available that's dioxin-free. Short of an ice cream cone, which I haven't figured out, but I'm working on it, there's no better package than what we've done. So I understand your position, but that's why we've done it. Thank you. And by the way, if you go to my website, you'll get a full discussion of this issue, of the offset issue at Stonyfield.com.
We're going to take one more question, and after this question is answered, Gary's book is at the desk. He's going to be available to sign it, so be sure and stop by and purchase one.
Okay, last one. I'll try to make the answer
Gary.
short.
I had been living in New Hampshire for many years, so you're New Hampshire's favorite son. And on that note, there's going to be a corner office available, probably, after you've left this job, pretty soon.
I've heard that.
And probably some other offices, we hope, really soon. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts along those lines, because I'd sure rather have you in there than a whole heck of a lot of other people, and down in Washington as well.
Would you, can I give you my wife's phone number? And
I actually have talked to Nick before.
Oh, yeah, okay, well. No, look, you're right. I mean, because it isn't enough just to activate individuals. We have to step into the fray, and what's your name? It's okay, just yell.
Ellen Fine.
Ellen. Oh, yeah, I know Ellen. I know you. The reality is that in New Hampshire right now, the Tea Party is actually running our state. I mean, it is over the top. I mean, their first bill was rescinding the ban on handguns at the State House, and it just went downhill from there. Lily Tomlin, what's her other line? She says, it was starting to get worse just before it got worse, and yes, the governor's race is an interesting place to be, and I think we do have to get the right people on Capitol Hill. I don't believe personally at this moment that that's the most effective. It's not my time. I mean, the Just Label It campaign, the ability to reach several million people, get into every congressional district in the country this year, to sit as I have with the president, sit as I have. One of the advantages of New Hampshire is, we don't vote for anyone whose hand we haven't shaken twice, okay? So, I mean, I've had Obama at my house for dinner, and I was at his house for dinner a couple weeks ago. But I've met with the First Lady last week. I've been with Secretary Vilsack and Lisa Jackson and Kathy Sebelius, and this access and using it, and why am I there? It's not just because of my campaign donations and my New Hampshire residence. It's because we've got 1 million people in an election year. That's why. Because they're terrified this election, despite what you're seeing going on. It's going to come down to 7 states, of which New Hampshire's one, by the way. So move back and vote there. But seriously, you make an excellent point. But I think right now, this GMO, this 2,4-D corn, this is a game changer. If we release 7 to 10-fold what we're now using with 2,4-D, and all the other crops that get in there, this is a big problem. So this is really where I think it makes the most sense. You guys have been amazingly patient tonight, so thank you so much.